Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event today. The title of today's webinar is Migrating to Microsoft 365. Do this first. My name is Teresa Resick, and I'm the Vice President of Market Intelligence here at AIM. And AIM is your host and producer of our event. And let's see here, advance a slide. And ActiveNav is the underwriter of today's webinar, and I thank them very much for their contribution. And certainly thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. And now I'd like to introduce our host and MC of today's webinar. Kevin Crane is AIM's content strategist, and he authors ebooks, infographics, and a number of items, learning items here at AIM on a wide variety of intelligent information management and digital transformation topics. Kevin is the producer and host of AIM on Air podcast. And this podcast was recently named one of the 10 best process management podcasts you should listen to. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Kevin Crane to begin the talk today. Hey, Kevin.
Hi, Teresa. Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot. It's great to be back again for another really cool AIM webinar session today. I'm so pleased to be talking about data migration, infrastructure migration to Microsoft 365. There are a lot of reasons for performing a data migration, everything from replacing or upgrading applications, maybe it's business process improvements, could be volume growth, or simply the need to move away from older systems. In all of these cases, one thing remains the same. The data not only needs to be moved from one place to another, but it really needs to fit in the new system and perform in ways that not only get it moved, but also make a difference. And that's why data migrations are so important and so complex and require such time and resources. So if your organization is like thousands of others and is planning to migrate your infrastructure to Microsoft 365, there are some important steps to take before you make the move. When you properly prepare your content, you can save money, you can lower your costs, you can improve the quality of your data, reduce the effort, and you can uncover some hidden opportunities to innovate and improve organizational performance along the way. So that's what we're going to be exploring today with our guests, starting with Peter Baumann. Peter is the CEO and founder of ActiveNav, a data privacy and governance software provider and innovator. And Peter is an expert in these areas with wide international and multi-sector experience. Joining him is Andrew Cohen, product owner at ActiveNav. Now, you saw Andrew on our most recent event on process automation, and Andrew returns with us today to help us discuss ways to plan and be more confident in our Microsoft 365 data migration plans. So gentlemen, welcome to the program today. Peter, if I could start with you, as I mentioned, if my organization is planning a migration to 365, what are some important considerations and steps to take before I begin the migration?
It's a pleasure to be here, Kevin. Thanks very much, and welcome to the audience. Thanks for attending today. So just like any large program, any large project, and not least any migration project, which I'm sure a number of the audience have been doing over the last decade or so, I certainly have. M365 is no different, Kevin. All the same principles apply. This is a huge change management thing that you're about to go through and inflict on your organization, inflict on your end users, if you like. And therefore, you need to make sure you've got their buy-in, let's call it the stakeholders across the group, on side. And when we're talking stakeholders, always start at the executive level, because there will be some fireworks, there will be some challenges, there will be some hiccups, things may go astray, may go awry, and you want to make sure the executive team they're supporting you, their hand on your back, if you like. I think that's the right way to have the hand, but you definitely want to have their support as you go into this mammoth task. And also as part of that, you're agreeing what those goals, the prioritization of the program is. A mistake that's often made with these type of programs is people think it's an IT thing, it's an IT decision. Often it is an IT decision that says, right, we're going to shift into XYZ box, or in this case, we're going to move it to 365. That decision has probably been made over a period of time with lots of stakeholders, but ultimately the IT decision, then the IT group often then drive that process. That can be an error. It's not their data, and they're just trying to achieve a goal, if you like, that's been set them. And the quicker, more efficiently they can do that, often without the business engagement, could be the better for them, but at the detriment of the rest of the business.
Well, Peter, you bring up an important point, and I do want to get to Andrew here in a second, but often we hear at AIM from practitioners that there is sort of a gap there between IT priorities and strategies, maybe the C-suite perspective and priorities and information management. There can be a disconnect there. Folks tell us that they struggle getting a seat at the table when it comes to information governance, intelligent information management. Any suggestions for those folks that are feeling that pain, how they can build that coalition and get the right support and visibility that they need?
Yeah, I would say the answer is in the word coalition. Build that coalition, and it happens to be, a pretty kind of broad, complex thing you're looking to do here, with all kinds of moving parts, and could be global in nature. But ignore that. You still need a coalition. You still need to bring a group of like-minded people together from all the respective stakeholders and all their departments. And then you need to treat it like any other large program. Don't go for big bang. You can't boil the ocean in a day, or in this case, maybe in a year or 6 months. Find some friendly areas, maybe some business units that have got some pressing issues and concerns, and are therefore far more supportive to be a guinea pig. Get them on side, cut your way with those friendlies, prove it out, demonstrate the ROIs, present those back, bring the next wave in and the next wave. And eventually you'll get to the point where the last people, maybe the final 20%, the laggards, if you like, or the the dissenters, are very much frowned upon, because they're the last ones to benefit, and you won't have dissenters because you've got the other 80% with you on the journey, reaping the benefits. So I think coalition is a great word, Kevin. Use it. Don't try and short circuit it.
Well, it's all part of the planning process, building that coalition along with the planning and all the technical bits and pieces. And Andrew, when I think of data migration, I think of primarily, I guess, what we call lift and shift. And we just take my stuff, get it on the new system, and then take it from there. That can be a straightforward approach, maybe familiar, potentially quick to implement, perhaps. But you say that lifting and shifting can leave us short. Can you explain why a lift and shift approach is not going to achieve my migration objectives?
I think there's probably a couple of things you want to think about during when you're sitting in that room with that coalition of stakeholders you were talking about. Is the goals of the organization are not to move the data from one place to another. That's not the main goal of the organization. You want to look at what the goals of are for the business itself, and how that process of migration can help you to achieve those goals. This is just one of the gears that gets turned in order to achieve those goals for the organization. So a simple lift and shift process might achieve one of the things in those broad goals for the organization, but it's not going to be the primary focus for it. You need to look at each of the different stakeholders in the room that are talking about this process and what they want to get out of it, what they can get out of it, the opportunities that exist for them. The planning part of it is probably the part that most organizations don't spend enough time on. They're keen to get to the work of it, to actually get into the process and start moving it around, but it really is probably the best place to spend the extra time is just to look at what you're trying to achieve and make sure that you're getting value from this migration for each of the stakeholders in that room for this project.
All right, if I'm planning and I am doing my upfront work now, what are some key things I should consider in that planning process of my migration? What are the things that I might overlook that can trip me up?
Yeah, I think I'd primarily say you want to make sure that your business processes don't get broken as you're going through this, right? Nobody, you can't stop the business from running. Whatever the goal is, whatever the business that you have in place, this is, like I said before, it's supplemental. It's in order to support the business. So the planning of this program of moving the data from one place to another is you have to fit that into the business that's already existing. So that can affect this timing and the scheduling. It can affect which repositories, which chunks of data wherever they happen to exist in your organization, which ones you go for first, which ones you leave behind, which ones you put off to until maybe some major other project has been completed. There's also the priorities of the different parts of the business. There's the lines of business that do the actual work. There's the supporting parts of the business, like internal functions like finance and legal and those kinds of things, and what their processes are, which are going to be very different from the frontline business, as well as the sort of regulatory or privacy impacts with the legal side of things, and what their kinds of priorities are going to be for that kind of stuff. And this is a really good opportunity for the organization to look at the content, look at all of that stuff that keeps the business running, and understand what it is, and use that process to help better manage that information that's out there.
That's a great opportunity, really. You have sort of a compelling reason to dig into the boxes, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So you could just pack them all up and move them in the van and stick them in the attic, you know, or whatever. But, you know, it's an opportunity to really understand what all your information is, what value it represents, and what risk it represents. And when it comes to risk, Peter, I fear that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to privacy, cybersecurity threats. Even the most advanced and tech-savvy organizations are falling prey to hackers who are becoming increasingly sophisticated. I'd like to understand more about Microsoft information protection labels. What are those, and how can they help me during my migration for improved data security and protection?
Yeah, let me just take the first part of, it wasn't really a question, the first part of your setup, if you like, Kevin. Then I might let Andrew answer the bit more specific to 365. You're quite right, and just by chance, I've been writing a paper for an event I'm at. It's titled "It's the Data Stupid," you know, playing on Clinton. And it is, and the cyber risk only exists because people are after your data. It's not because they just have fun. Well, you know, some people might have fun breaking in your perimeters just for the sheer, you know, heck of it. But generally, people are after your data. And the last line of defense you have is your data. And so to Andrew's earlier point, we have to make the connection between why organizations seem to be prepared to almost just put a blanket, a cover over that issue, and not really addressing the data, what data they've got, why they're storing it, who it belongs to, does it comply with their existing well thought out, well managed policies. Our experience is it's very rare that it does. And the simple reason is because it's so difficult. And we're not really talking specifically here towards structured data, which largely sits within well-governed database environments, which are still difficult and challenging and often have some of the better data in it. We're talking about the other 80%, as we all know, the unstructured piece. And the reason people don't deal with it largely in our experience is because they don't know how to, and they don't know how to find out what's in it. And so, you know, our view of the world, and I happen to have our new T-shirt on, is zero dark data. We have to take our customers to a position of zero dark data, no more toxic, sensitive data out there. And that means you need to do an inventory. And that inventory will flush out a lot of the things you've been raising there, Kevin. It will tell you what you don't need to migrate. It will remove toxic, redundant, obsolete, trivial, rot, and find sensitive data that you can manage accordingly. And then working that together with your existing processes, procedures, and your policies, for example, you can then prepare that content as you ingest it across into any tool, in this case 365. And then I'll hand over the baton, if you like, to Andrew, because you've got to do that prep work. You've got to know what you've got before you do the prep work. But in doing so, just as you talk to preparation, it means you're very well prepared to have some chance of 365 succeeding with the ongoing piece.
Yeah, to pick up on Peter's point about understanding the content that you have, the Microsoft information protection platform, I guess is the word for it, allows you to embed some of that knowledge into the content itself. So MIP, Microsoft Information Protection, has this feature called sensitivity labels, which allows you to embed into the files themselves the value that that content has for the business. It reflects how important it is to the business in terms of how it needs to be protected, who should have access to it, where it should be stored. All of that information can be injected into every single document inside of the MIP framework provided by the M365 environment. So that that process of understanding your data, of validating each document, understanding whether it has any value for the organization or whether it lands into that rot pile that you need to clean up to have disposition for, or if it has value for the information, what is that level of value of what the sensitivity, the risk even is one way to look at it as well, that value that document has for the organization. And then the MIP label that gets embedded into that document means that in the M365 environment, or that very large platform that exists, that label tells the MIP system, this is the value that I have for the organization. And then the M365 environment, all the security controls and management controls that exist there can then protect that information across the different parts of that platform through the life cycle of that document. When it gets shared to people, when it gets saved outside the organization, when it gets emailed to other people, when it gets shared. All of that, all of those controls can be then driven by that sensitivity label that gets embedded into the document by the MIP process. So that's a little bit down in the weeds, but that's how it works.
Does the MIP cost extra, or is that part of the is that part of the infrastructure? Is that an extra cost?
Yeah, there are there are certifications for Microsoft pricing, so I'm not going to get into all that. It's very, very complicated. But if you are an E3 customer or an E5 customer, it comes out of the box. It's part of that platform.
So, all right, I get it. All the more important then to do this sort of analysis and know your data is what I'm hearing from you both. My question is, how do I do that? My data may not all be in one place. I mean, it's easy enough if I'm moving something from bucket A to bucket B, and it's simply a like for like, or I'm kind of lifting it, sifting it and shifting it or whatever. I get that. But what if I'm really looking at information from multiple places? How on earth do I go out to my organization and understand what all my data is when I may not even know it exists or where it lives?
Andrew, I'm trying to think. There's so many ways of trying to answer that one, Kevin. I mean, I think if maybe we have a first shot at answering it from an inventory perspective, you need to be able to connect to the data, and so as a starter, you want to be able to connect to those different data estates, probably sitting within different repositories, and you want to be able to obviously then do an inventory of that data. And then ideally aggregate it and look at the data across the discrete discrete repositories. That alone will generate a whole bunch of fascinating metrics and information that you may choose to act on. But that would be a very good place to start. Now, depending on the size of your organization, you may choose to do that in chunks. And you may choose to do it by geography, by business unit, or by data type or data repository. It really depends on the size. One of our customers had 9 petabytes of data in 24 countries. And one of the problems they had early on was when we actually started to bring the results back, everybody was focused on speed and scale. Nobody was focused on the ability to consume this data coming back at you that you've never, ever been able to see before. And so, again, really, really smart project management, change management kicks in here. But I think as a starter, you want to be able to connect to the data and find out what you've got. And Kevin, old school approach to this, or manual, if you like, would probably be bringing in consultants, whiteboarding, understanding where these different repositories, these containers and boxes and appliances sit within the organization. There's still value in that. The problem with that is you fall off very quickly because you don't know what's in those. And so it becomes quite subjective. I was talking to Bob. Bob thinks we've got this data in this container in this state. Well, guess what? Bob's probably 10% right. And you don't know what that other 90%. And so you want a combination of those two. But the old school approach to whiteboarding at a high level isn't wrong. It's still got its place. But now there's means of actually looking at the data, and then you marry those two together. Andrew, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's obviously that you can't know what's in there without doing the connection first and doing some kind of an inventory across it to just know what's there. I think the challenge of being able to consume that information back, one of the biggest challenges is that you need to present, that's an IT answer. It's not a business answer. It doesn't tell me as a business owner where my data is, because it could be spread across any and all of those different locations. And it's important for me as a business owner what the content is and what value it has for me. I don't care where it's stored. That's an IT problem. That's not my problem. So the inventory is the first kick at it, where you get a kind of a big picture view of how big my problem is and where in the geography of my network or my data centers or the world that lives. But then you have to turn that into a business problem. You have to be able to reflect that back to the data owners so that they can understand what the challenges they have with that. So it's a little bit of a, it's a two-step kind of thing where it's technology and then the business and then back and forth like that.
And Andrew, Kevin, I might add to that. We talked a little bit earlier on about the coalition and how do you bring your stakeholders on side and how do you create this energy within an organization to act? Well, one of the best ways of doing it from our experience is showing them the data. And, this is data, this is fascinating data. And it's fascinating on two fronts normally. One is it's absolutely terrifying what's in there and how litigious it could be for the organization, risky. It could be toxic. It could literally be the keys to the kingdom, password files, and we find millions of them that have just been lifted and shifted by IT folk and then inadvertently forgotten to delete. So it could be very scary, very toxic data, which usually wakes the audience up, particularly the C-suite. Or it could just be kind of non-compliant for policy, for retention schedule type data, or ultimately you start moving into the world of infonomics, where the data starts to add value to the front line of their business. And of course, you're always going to get the executive suite intrigued at that point. But it's really good if you can quickly shine a light on a sample set of data. It doesn't have to be 1 billion files and documents. It can even be just 1 million. And then you can draw some conclusions from that and you'll wake the organization up. And it's also a wonderful way of kind of testing the policies and processes you already have in place. Maybe they were written 5 years ago, pre-GDPR and CCPA, et cetera. And you can map the data against those existing policies you've got and see if they need tightening up before you prepare the content for migration and then ongoing post-migration.
Very good. We are speaking with Peter Baumann, CEO and founder of ActiveNav, and Andrew Cohen, product owner at ActiveNav. We're talking about ways to plan and execute a Microsoft 365 data migration plan. We will be getting to your questions here in just a moment. We have lots of them coming in, so stand by. We'll be getting to them. But before we go, Andrew, tell us a little bit more about how ActiveNav can help us with all of this.
Yeah, so we've been doing data discovery and migrations and understanding content for businesses for a long time, and it's the growth of 365 and the migrations that have been happening over the last couple of years. 365 has been around for a while with various different names, but it's really picked up in the last little bit. And we wanted to sort of give a kind of high level, like, what are the steps to make this happen? We've kind of touched on it a little bit in the conversation so far. I think there's a few bits missing from this particular slide. I think the very first one is get your coalition together, right? Get your stakeholders in a room and understand what your business goals are. On the technology side of it, so like actually getting software in place and running through them, the discover and cleanse part is where things really start to get interesting. So understanding how big your problem is, how much data do you have? Peter gave this sort of idea that you don't have to do it all in order to get the impression across to the senior stakeholders in the organization about how big a problem you might have. He said maybe you needed to do, you know, a sample of 1 million files. We had one customer who did a pilot over the summer. They took a month, and it was a part of their it was a federal U.S. federal agency, a very small part of that agency. The records management folks, part of the management team, did a pilot program with our software Discovery Center on 636,000 files. Very small in terms of how big these projects can be. But one of the things that they found when they just went and scanned this content for what's the value to the organization, they found that a good 16% of it was duplicate files. They were spending time and money managing an extra 16% of content that they didn't need to be. And another challenge that they had was just information that they didn't need to have anymore. It was, again, another about 15 to 16% of the information was just rot. So it was past its retention period, wasn't business value, wasn't that kind of stuff. So those very quickly, within from start to finish, less than a month for them to find this information in a very small pilot, and that the impact that has to the rest of the organization to say, this is how fast it was. This is the change that it can make to the content that I have, right? To reduce the size of that challenge of migrating content. So if you're removing 20 to 30% of your content just because it's duplicate files or risk rot content, to reduce the size of your program of the migration plan. So that brings real value to the process above a lift and shift, as we discussed before. So that sort of planning what you have, knowing what you have before you even start to move the content across from your existing repository into a 365. The other thing that we talked about during the discussion was about understanding the content that you have. So looking for content and being able to categorize it for the business. So what kind of information is in there? Are there particular content types that are important to you? Are there particular kinds of information that are important to you, both from a business process and from regulatory perspective? So if it's intellectual property stuff that you need to worry about, if it's PII type stuff that you need to worry about, knowing, being able to look through that content and understanding what it is, and then extracting that information as metadata. So content that tells you what the actual content is. So metadata, information about information. Everybody knows what metadata is now these days, don't they? And then being able to use that information to drive the rest of the process that you're going through, the migration of the content. So knowing what it is, being able to identify it as part of the process for doing the migration. So restructuring, so making sure that if you're a business owner, that all of your information moves into M365 into a location that makes sense for the way your business works. Before, it may have been spread out across different data centers, across different types of repositories. If you're going to consolidate your business onto a single platform like M365, making sure that you pull it all into that new location with a structure that makes sense for your business, makes sense for the data owners, makes sense for the users to be able to find it and access it. That metadata that I talked about can help drive that information. So knowing which program it belongs to, what type of information is there, can help direct where the relocation of that information is in the new structure in 365. Doing the actual migration itself, so the actual hard chunking of taking files from one place and moving them to another, that was the main goal of the program, was to get the data over to another location. But you're bringing the value from those other processes of taking a look at what information is important to keep, what you can get rid of, restructuring the information, bringing across some of that value, some of that metadata value, understanding what the content is, what the value is, what the context of that information is, and bringing that with those documents into the M365 environment. So taking advantage of the metadata columns that exist in SharePoint, for example, and populating business information into those columns that go alongside the actual content that lives there. making sure that it works. Like I said before about this one customer who did this pilot, going through that process of proving it out from end to end, and then bringing the results of that back into the business, bringing it back to the stakeholders and telling them how this program worked, what the benefits were, what the takeaways were, how the process could work better. We always learn something from these things. Understanding how those lessons learned can be used for the next phases of those processes. So going through that, making it a bit of an iterative process, you learn as you go and get better at it. I think that's kind of a fairly understandable layout for how you would go through one of these programs. We talked a little bit about MIP, Microsoft Information Protection, and what it brings to the table. This is an example of what it looks like for an end user. So this is somebody who's editing a document and has some kind of a value for the organization. And inside of the application, in this case, it's Word, you can see that there's a sensitivity label that's been applied to this document, and that can be applied by the user. The user can do that. The content itself, having particular keywords or patterns, while the person's creating the document, can drive that classification, that applying that metadata value to the document. Or it could be something that happens during that migration process while you go through and scan your content to understand the value it has, then use that migration process to apply the MIP sensitivity labels as the document is moved into the M365 environment. So as soon as it lands there, it can take advantage of those security controls that are built into the M365 environment through that MIP label. This label, of course, you can see here, it's applied a header to it, but the real value is that it's actually metadata that's embedded in the document, so that all kinds of third-party tools, not just the M365 tools, but also tools like ours, tools from DLP vendors, can also read and support that classification and drive their processes based on that label as well. I think that's a really powerful thing that you get from M365, and that you can add value to your content as it gets migrated into that platform. And then, best practices. Well, there's some of them. There's lots of them. Don't try to, I think Peter said this, don't try to do it all at once. It is a massive shift in your organization, a big change to the way your business works, a big change to the way the end users, the people who run your business actually have to function, going through a massive change and saying, okay, on Friday it was like this, on Monday it's going to be like that. That's probably not something that's going to go smoothly. You need to have good plans, good understanding of how it's going to impact your business. Making sure that everybody is involved, having that coalition, making sure that everybody understands what the goals of the program are, that it's not just led by a single department. And I'm not really trying to beat on IT here, but you can't have a single part of the business drive something that's going to affect everybody in this way. It's got to be a coalition of folks who are trying to get to the same place, that they're helping each other to get there rather than being driven there by one part of the business. Move only the good data. I gave an example of one of our customers who did a pilot. 50%. I actually, it's funny. It says 40 to 50%. I heard of one customer. They had 65% of rot data. So totally unusable, not important to the business, needed to get rid. I couldn't believe that 60% of their data, 65% of their data was stuff that they didn't need to worry about anymore. A massive savings for them in terms of the cost of managing that information, but also a significant reduction in the risk that content exposes the organization to as well. So information that does not need to be stored by the business means that it's not subject. If you can get rid of it, then you're reducing your risk of privacy breach. You're reducing your risk of FOIA requests if you're that kind of an organization. It's a real, it's not intangible, but it's a real, often overlooked savings that can come from being able to reduce that data footprint in your organization. Taking advantage of that metadata, really important. You've done the work of understanding what your content is, who owns the data, what's the context for it, what's the value of that information to the organization. Maintain it, keep it with that those documents with that content as you move into the new platform that you're aiming for, so that it can bring value to you in the future. It's not something that should be left behind. If you do all that work, take advantage of it as you move forward into their change management. Huge, huge, huge thing. You have to be able to ensure your communications and your processes are understood and well communicated with everybody in the organization. So having a good understanding of where you're headed with that coalition, the goals that you're trying to achieve, but also making that understandable for the poor schleps like me who live on the ground and have to deal with the impacts for those changes. I want to know what the value is going to be for me, how it's going to make my job easier, how it's going to make my job be more effective when that information goes through this process, this change process on the information, change process on how my job works, and about how that information gets managed going forward. And then if we have this little program at ActiveNav where we're looking at offering folks the opportunity to understand their environment, to go through what we're calling a readiness plan of what does your content look like, how prepared are you to make that move into that. And if you're interested in that, you can see there's a couple of links up there. And that was my presentation for ActiveNav Discovery Center.
Very
Moving to
good.
365.
Very good. That is Andrew Cohen. Andrew, thank you so much for your comments today. And also Peter Baumann, thank you as well. These gentlemen are from ActiveNav. These folks are experts in data migration and information management. I really want to thank them for being part of our discussion today. We do want to take your questions here now in our Q&A section. We have a number coming in. So Peter and Andrew, get ready. So please, please, if you have some questions for Peter and Andrew, please feel free to type them into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we will pick them up and try to get to them in our remaining time. But Peter and Andrew, we have some questions coming in. Here's one. Quote, the biggest challenge I am facing is awareness and adoption of Microsoft or Office 365 by C-suite and managers. How can one convince executives to move away from emailing documents and dictating sharing by way of network shares? We have operations using Teams, SharePoint, but fundamental change is not possible because our executives and management still don't use it and feel they don't have the time to learn. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Andrew, I am one of the guilty mentioned parties here. And so as somebody that used to be an early adopter earlier in my life and career, I'm now a laggard. And I get very angry when anyone touches any of my my little systems and coping techniques. And so if I just talk from a personal point of view, maybe first of all, Kevin, I'll adopt new technology and move across, even if it requires a little bit of learning and time on my side, once I'm convinced it's better, more efficient, and has other whistles and bells associated with it. I'll resist it, I think, just from a personal point of view, until I'm convinced of some of those points. And of course, everyone's slightly different. Andrew, I'll let you take a formal response to it.
I just want to follow it up just quickly with, if you take the tools that people are used to away from, if you just take them away from them, that's when you're going to get shadow IT, right? People are going to find a way to work the way they used to. They have to be, as Peter said, they have to be convinced of the value that it brings to them on a day-to-day basis. I think the interesting thing that a lot of organizations have gone through is the change from file shares, which turned into a big mess 20 years ago. And SharePoint was going to be our savior. So everybody invested heavily in SharePoint, moved over to SharePoint. It was good for a while. Then it turned into a mess. People have on-premise SharePoint, and it's a bit of a mess. There's now a move to 365 SharePoint Online. We're going to inherit those same mistakes unless we change our processes, unless we have a more effective, ongoing plan to manage that information. It's not necessarily taking away the tools that people have, but showing the organization where information is piling up where it shouldn't be, right? You get those convenience copies. 20 to 30% of files from one of our customers were convenience copies that people were keeping in their shared drives or on their own desktop computers. It's not an efficient way to handle that information. Using tools like Discovery Center to be able to show that, to say, look, you have this 20% duplicate versions to the organization, to the C-suite, to show them there's a savings that can be had there, not only in risk, but also in IT costs and efficiency in the business, knowing where the single truth version of a document happens to reside rather than all these convenience copies that happen to be lying around. There's lots of different challenges. A lot of it is very cultural. It'd be a real challenge to get that, but that's one of the examples that you could use maybe for helping to get the executives on board.
Here's another question from William Van Doyle. Quote, what tools would you recommend to use for data inventory? One tool I have used in the past is Droid, created by the UK National Archives. Are there other tools that you might recommend?
Andrew, obviously, as the providers of what we believe a stellar data discovery and inventory tool, we would recommend ACTIVENAVO. Thank you very much, everybody. But maybe on a more helpful note, this is actually quite a big job. And the customers that we often get taken into are those that have already failed 3 or 4 times. And so what typically happens is the IT department will first of all try and use something for free. Or something that's very, very inexpensive they can put on their credit cards. And that might be quite good to give you a feel, a flavor for the kind of challenge that you're dealing with, but it won't go any further. They'll then typically try to use a tool they already have that lends itself to some kind of data discovery exercise. And I say carefully things like e-discovery tools, DLP tools, even identity access management tools. They could do a pretty good job of discovering the data. Or if you like, our customers' experience is they then struggle with the hardest parts, which is the remediation, the workflow, the process, the auditability. You've got to be able to prove that this has happened to this data, you've deleted it, quarantined, what have you, and the sophistication of the rules. And so our response is, if we're kind of in that engagement, we'll usually wait till the customer's ready to have the right conversation. And we have a terrible thing we say internally, are they asking the right question? And for me, that's the consciously incompetent quadrant, Kevin. I think when customers reach the consciously incompetent, then they're in the right place to have the right discussion. And what does that mean from a tools perspective? Just make sure whatever you use is built for the job. It's built for purpose, whatever that purpose is you're looking for. And if you've only got a small estate of data, you may be able to get away with something at no cost. If you've got hundreds of millions of files, you won't. And every month that you're trying to do this on the side, if you like, with another tool, will put you back 6 months. So I think it's a question of using the right tool for the job. And Andrew, I don't know if you have a more technical response to that.
I think one of the challenges with the sort of simple tools, or what I'll call adjacent tools, which are sort of, they come at it from a different perspective, but they don't go all the way across the goal line, is that their focus tends to be a little bit narrow. They're either focused on a particular type of information, a particular type of repository. You want something that's very broad, that answers all of the different kinds of questions that you have inside your organization. How many different repositories do you have that your tool can connect to? Can I get to all of my data with that tool? Can I understand each of the different file types that I have, making sure that you've got that kind of coverage. There are in every organization, there's always the weirdos, right? The one group over in the corner that does that one thing that's super important for the business, but they're the only ones who know how to do it. That might be where the crown jewels are being stored. You want to make sure that the tools that you're looking for can answer the questions that might be there as well. I think that's probably an important thing to think about.
Peter and Andrew, it's been great speaking with you today. We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, one last question. What if I've already moved to Microsoft? Can I still clean up my data? And if so, how?
No, you're done. Sorry, you can't.
Done. Out of there.
Yeah, that's it.
It's
Too
over.
bad. Sorry.
Back up.
Yep, absolutely. There's all kinds of tools that can do it. Our tool Discovery Center can connect into M365, look at the content that's being stored in your SharePoint online, in your Teams files, in your Exchange online, to go through that same process of understanding the information, understanding who owns the information, what the value that it brings to that. So the tools that we provide not only help you before you do the migration, also once your information has been stored there. So I was talking about that ongoing process that you need to go through in order to make sure you don't get yourself into that same problem again in 5 years. You want to make sure that that continuous governance, that information management side of things is still happening for that content. So our tools can help you before, during, and after.
Andrew, if I may, I'd go even a little further, Kevin. Obviously, Microsoft and other similar kind of big infrastructure workflow tools, they're trying to cover a lot of ground. They're trying to do a lot of things for the average customer. If you have special requirements, you're going to need special tools. One of our financial services customer, I can't name them, unfortunately, they had manually labeled through MIP 30,000 files. What's that mean? That means 30 seconds per user, probably. They realized they then, through doing our inventory, they realized they have 15 million files that they've migrated across. And so what do they do with these 15 million? So in 3 weeks, we labeled up the 15 million files automatically without any manual intervention other than some check-in, obviously. What was interesting was those 30,000 original manually labeled files were part of the 15 million. The work we did, we found that 80% of them had been mislabeled. And a large portion of the mislabeling was on the security level. And so, we don't have an answer really to this, but you can go figure. If you're asking lots of different humans to do lots of different things, you're going to get lots of different answers and responses and versions. And so this is one of those things where technology kind of created the problem. You really need technology to answer it. And it's also fascinating because it's not just about getting that content ready for migration. Once you're in the new repository, once you're in 365, you may need additional tools to really tighten it up and comply with your own rules and policies. And so that was a real life example.
That's such an important point, Peter, I think. And hackers will exploit that later down the road, those small gaps in protocol and acumen. All right, very good. That is Peter Baumann and Andrew Cohen from ACTIVENAVO. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being our guest today on the event today. At this point, I'd like to turn it back to Teresa to help us close out today's session. Teresa?
As we're coming to a close here on all of this, I'm going to step back and ask each of our folks who have joined us today here, just for some closing thoughts or some key takeaways, because I think this is just a whole lot of really good discussion we've been having. And I want to start first with Andrew Cohen from ACTIVENAVO. Your closing thought today.
Oh, sum it all up in one pithy 10-second comment.
Of course.
Coalition, that's the word, right? Number one, get together and understand your goals. Absolutely. If you don't have that, you're going to fail. You really will. Sorry.
Peter Baumann from ACTIVENAVO, your closing thoughts.
Well, I kind of leaked a title of a paper I'm writing, and I think it's a good way to end as well, which is it's all about the data, stupid. And so don't shortchange yourself on the data, prepare it, do the work in advance, and then keep doing that work. It's not just for Christmas. So lots of metaphors and things thrown in there. And Teresa, if I may, just think about a couple of the questions I saw as well. We've got a paper, which I guess AIM can put up on the post-event, from a customer we can actually name. It's one of the customers is happy to be named, which was Plains Midstream. They're a midstream pipe petro company, Canada and America. And they have done an enormous program, which includes 365 migration. And they talk quite openly about some of the challenges and some of the things they had to do through workflow and process management, which I think could be very helpful for this audience. It's on our website, but I'm sure AIM could help circulate that if need be.
Yeah, this has definitely been a fantastic session. And Kevin, I know you've been kindly sitting here, conducting this whole talk today. I want to ask you for your closing thoughts and everything we've been discussing.
Oh, I have a closing thought. Well, it comes down to the power of knowing, right? The power of knowing what you have, what it represents to your organization. Is it risky? Is it redundant? Is it valuable? Is it innovative? Is it something we need to keep or get rid of? And it all starts with that knowledge, however you get it. That's why I always ask, how do I understand all my stuff? But once you have that, then some good things can happen in terms of building the coalition that we talked about, in terms of really making a difference in how the new system works effectively to move the needle or not. So it all starts with the knowing.
Well, thank you. Thank you, ActiveNav, for sponsoring our event today. Without support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to bring everyone these free events. So thank you. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. For AIM, I'm Teresa Resick, and we'll see you with our next event. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye, guys.